Initializing. There we go.
Boy, okay. So, as you guys are doing, want some geography on it? It'll say on the top. Like I said, I think they're on the top. Anywho, oh, and by the way, you won't need to sign up for another Edmodo code. It's just the same one. I just changed it. Yes. So as we mentioned, there are 5 themes of geography. What are they, you might be wondering? Well, covered that yesterday too. But here they are, all laid out in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And each of them pertains to a different bit of understanding about the way the world works. And so what we're going to try to do today is we're going to look at all 5 themes, provided we have time, and we're going to kind of explain what they are and sort of how you might be using them. So starting with location, right? Now, one of the things I did say to you guys, that is, I was going to talk to you guys about how to properly write notes. One of the things I find is there's a lot of bad advice on how to take notes properly. And if you think about it, note-taking is sort of an essential skill. Not so much because you're going to find yourself listening to lectures as a career, but you will find yourself a lot of time having your boss tell you, this is what I want you to do, and you having to take a great amount of information and condensing it into a much smaller bit of information. I've seen this in everything from the construction field to biotechnical studies. And so ultimately, learning how to do that is pretty important. And so there's 2 main methods of note-taking I'm going to show you. The first is probably the most commonly taught one in schools in North America, and that's called the Cambridge method of note-taking. You've probably seen this before, not even knowing that that's true. But if you've ever seen someone write notes like this, where you have like the first theme, and they write something like this, location. Right? And then down here, they have a sub-bracket where they kind of further define the root of location, like so. And then maybe they have Roman numerals to further subdivide each of the main points. Have you ever seen anything like that before? Where it's organized, you start with a larger concept and work your way down. That's the Cambridge method. Okay? And it's very good for a lot of things. One thing is, if you understand that what you're doing is taking a larger concept and then defining it in smaller, more detailed concepts, it can help you kind of define things and really kind of nail down what it is you're looking at. The problem, though, is if you don't know what you're talking about as bigger concepts to begin with, they can get really jumbled and confusing. So another method you can use is called the Cornell system. It's actually a graphic organizer. You draw this sort of L shape, and you're going to have 3 parts to your notes. The first is terms. You're going to have vocab words. Then down here you have a summary, which you hold at the very end. And then up here you have notes. So the idea is that you go ahead and set out all the key words. So anytime you see a bold word, anytime you see a proper name, a place, a thing, whatever, it goes here on the left. So we put location, place, etc. Then over here, you write the actual notes as you would normally, more or less trying to summarize things. Then down in the summary, you write sort of the key idea behind the whole lecture. Now, this is way more labor intensive than this, because you end up essentially writing 3 different things instead of just 1. But what this is really good at is sort of pulling everything apart at the end so that you can kind of take the general themes, which is very helpful for like when you're writing the essays and things like that. And trust me, there's plenty of other ways to go about how you write notes. But the thing you have to start to do is you have to be able to take someone who is not good at making PowerPoints and make sense of what they do. Because, as I've said before, you guys know from communications, not everybody knows how to do PowerPoints. And I've encountered some really terrible ones from college professors who like literally put like 4 paragraphs and they'll show up like 3 seconds and then move on. So how do you survive in this type of environment without getting completely overwhelmed with information? You have to learn to be able to cut it out, cut out the fat. And finding unnecessary words and getting rid of them. In fact, the old way of doing it is writing in shorthand, but we don't tend to do that so much anymore. Although some of the shorthand characters still exist. But anyways, we'll kind of go into some of this a little bit more as we go. But that's kind of the rough idea right there. Some ways, some strategies you can employ if you want to. So I was going to start with this image, which you guys have seen before on my laptop, I'm assuming. What is it? It's the world, sure. It's the world at night, right? What information can we tell about the world looking at this image? Any ideas? Yep, exactly. Areas where there's a high population, right? Have you noticed how concentrated the United States is to the east? In fact, most of the lights are over here and here. But what about South America? It's all along the coast for the most part. What's this right here? You know? It's the Amazon rainforest. Not much electricity there. The continent of Africa. What's this big thing up here? The Sahara Desert. And down here we get the tropical areas. You can see all these different areas, not only based upon their access to electricity, but also population density, right? So these are all things to consider as you go about business. Are you taking notes on your phone, or are you playing on it? Okay. I just need you to know that you're doing good stuff. Anyways, I forget what exactly that is. I'll have to double check it. I think it has to do with something that's kind of cool. Probably a rendition of the world, because one of the things we have to understand is when we try to show the world as it is through maps, we always run into an issue, and that's called distortion. That's because whenever you take a 3D thing, a three-dimensional object, and try to render it in 2 dimensions, you're going to have mistakes. So map projection, the way you show a map, deals with trying to limit the amount of distortion. So this image, if I remember correctly, shows an example of map distortion. I've got too much going on my desktop. Whatever. It doesn't matter. We'll get rid of it. Oh no, it's just the planets. There's a different image I had in mind. It's okay. There's actually a pretty good one in your textbook. Holy cannoli. Why is there so many things open? What is happening? What is happening? Oh, my computer. That's all right. We'll load it up again. 5 games. Anywho, but the one thing that helps is whenever we kind of talk about the first theme of location, we have these imaginary lines that help us sort of figure out where things are on the globe. Longitude and latitude, right? And first and foremost, you're going to need to know which is which. So what's the difference? Which ones run north and south? Longitude, good. Therefore, by power of deduction, is latitude, right? What is 0 degrees of latitude called? The equator, good. And what about 0 degrees of longitude? There you go. You know why it's called the prime meridian? Because each line of longitude is called a meridian. So the prime just means the first. Now, something of interest is each of these tell us different things. And whenever you were navigating using longitude and latitude, calculating latitude is actually kind of easy. Fact is, it's basic geometry. Using the Pythagorean theorem, you can figure out your relative latitude easily if you just see the stars. But figuring out longitude is really hard. just because of the natural angles of the Earth. And so for a long time, when sailors would navigate on the ocean, they only had a rough estimate of where they actually were. In fact, the system that Columbus used when he ran into North America was called dead reckoning. Because essentially, if you were wrong, you're dead. That's one of the things I've heard sailors say a few different times to me, is you never have felt really lost until you're lost at sea, because there's literally nothing. But regardless, there's a few different tools we can use for calculating these different things. The easiest one now, you can actually calculate your longitude based upon 2 points and time. If you know the time at one location compared to yours, the difference in every 4 minutes equals 1 degree of longitude, which is kind of interesting because there's actually a giant competition about this in England in the 19th century to figure out this stuff. But regardless, we're really getting back into the concept of location. And the best way to summarize location is where something is. So one of the things you'll need to know is where the different continents are. Not too terribly difficult. However, one thing I would point out is this massive thing, Eurasia. We tend to break up Europe and Asia as two distinct continents, but we could also argue they're one. Interestingly enough, India is actually its own subcontinent as well, because it's got its own tectonic plate. So ultimately, what is a continent is really kind of hard to explain. In fact, you could argue there's only three. You know, it's kind of an interesting thing when you think about it. Most of you guys are like, what do you mean there's only three continents? Well, if you think about it, North and South America are connected by an isthmus. So you could argue that that's just one big continent. Greenland is actually way smaller than Australia. So technically that might be an island. Furthermore, Africa is connected to the rest of Eurasia, so you can say that's a continent. But what about Antarctica? Well, it's actually mostly ice. If you were to strip away all the ice, it's actually just a series of smaller islands. They just are connected by a big chunk of ice. So you could argue that that's just islands. That's not even really a continent. So you have 1, 2, and Australia is another one. So again, defining things is a little tricky. As a general rule, though, we tend to divide it as a large landmass that has its own tectonic plate. Is generally how we tend to break them down, and this is more or less how we look at it. Now, of course, we'll get into particulars here eventually, but whenever it talks about the different kinds of location, where something is, of course, yesterday we covered the two main ones, absolute location and relative location. So can someone give me an example from yesterday? What's absolute location? What would be an example of absolute? Yes, ma'am. This came. Yep. You're using a set of coordinates, in this case, street coordinates. Of course, longitude and latitude is another one. What about relative location? Can you give me an example of relative location?
Image chart.
That's good. It's referencing something else. It's in relation to this other thing. So that's relative location, which we tend to use more often. If you think about it, when a lot of times we navigate things, we tend to use a set of coordinates, but it's based upon, much more frequently, describing how you get somewhere. Now, of course, this is sort of a dated thing. People tend not to use Google Maps as much. They'll use a variety of GPSs and things like that. But I always thought this was funny because it's like swimming across the Atlantic Ocean. You know, but just kind of like you just do that. Okay, so let's talk about place. A place describes somewhere. We're going to play a little game. I'm going to show you a picture, and I want you to tell me where in the world it is. Okay? Now, we'll start with this easy one, right? I want you to tell me which continent it's on, right? Not, you have to be more specific than that, just which continent. All right, where's that? Okay, so Africa. You guys think African continent? Anybody have any other suggestions? Where is it? Nothing? No one wants to say anything else? It's North America. It's Utah. Okay. All right, let's try this one. Where's this? Which continent? South America, okay. North America. North America, you'd be correct. That's actually Kentucky. That's Bluegrass Lake. Let's try it again. One more time. You guys are on to me. Yep, this is also Kentucky. I-65. I-65. Oh, I-64, sorry. Yeah. So, one of the things that we have to understand about place is that it changes, right? And we're dealing with a couple different things. Physical features. This is literally carved out of hills and mountains. We also have things that are man-made, such as large buildings. It actually redirects weather. Lastly, we have the issue of climate. All these things change, but as average gives us an understanding of what somewhere is like. We use this to describe what places are like. Now, we've already done all that stuff. So now we're going to look at the question of region. Region as a theme deals with cultural similarities, right? And this gets kind of interesting because we tend to bind places together not necessarily on physical place, but by how culture is similar. For instance, one example of a region is the Middle East. Where is the Middle East? The middle of the East. That's actually the Greek terminology for it. Because let's start with another concept entirely. You guys know the Mediterranean Sea? Do you know what the word Mediterranean means? Middle of the, you know what Terra is? Terra is earth. It's the sea that's in the middle of the earth. If you look at the Greek map of the world, it basically was the Mediterranean. They had the southern part of Europe, they had the northern part of Africa, as well as this area. We think of Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, all those places, and then Spain over here in the west. So if you think about Middle East, boom, right there, right? But here's the thing is, 600s AD, the Prophet Muhammad spread the faith, and it was continued under his second in command, Abu Bakr, which is actually where you get the split in the faith between the three branches of Islam. And they came over across the northern part of Africa, and later the Moors, the folks from Morocco, came up into Spain. So the Middle East actually stretches all the way across northern Africa into the area of Iran, Pakistan, that kind of area. Although technically Pakistan is very much more culturally similar in ways to India, though there's that distinction as well. So we're dealing with cultural similarities that have way larger borders than we necessarily think. Again, generally speaking, if we look at the Middle East, this is kind of what a map of it shows, though you can stretch that out a little bit farther west. Here's an interesting question. Is North America a region? Do we have certain sort of similarities? Now, what countries are in North America? The U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Mm-hmm. Would we say we're similar to each other, all three of those countries? Yes and no. But generally speaking, Mexico is not considered a region with the United States and Canada. It's considered more of a region with Latin America, yeah? In truth, though, the U.S. and Canada have a lot of similarities. There's differences as well, for sure, and we're going to focus on those. But consider this. What's the primary language in both the U.S. and Canada? Yeah. Do they speak other language in those countries? Absolutely. In fact, as you guys know, probably Canada is bilingual. What's their other language?
French.
Yeah. Now that being said, do all Canadians speak French?
No.
In fact, most Canadians, from my experience, have about as well an understanding of French as you do of Spanish after coming through high school in the United States. You can get by for the most part, but maybe not being that phenomenal at it. In fact, I remember a friend of mine who's from Toronto. We were in a restaurant, and he just mouthing off was speaking to somebody. Our waitress was actually from an area outside of Dublin, from Ireland. And so he started speaking to her in French, just on willy-nilly, and she totally schooled him on French. Like, she was phenomenal at speaking. He was like, just kind of stop. It was hilarious. But yeah, most of it is speaking Quebec, but they are technically multilingual. What's that? Question, comment, or just kind of any old dude. But you know, you do run into this issue. Now, here's a question: why? Why aren't we multilingual? Why don't we tend to speak lots of languages in the United States and Canada? Well, I don't think that's true. We got time for days. More, it's not even so much that, I don't think. Otherwise, there wouldn't be software for it. It's why would you? Consider this. If you live in, say, England, right, and you drive the equivocal distance from your, say, the city of London to Paris, that's the same size difference of, you know, maybe not quite this, but close to driving from Louisville to Lexington. Just think about that for a second. If you were to drive the equivalent distance of from Louisville to Florida in Europe, you would go from England to Romania, crossing something like 7 or 8 different languages along the way. You have to learn different languages when you're in that close a proximity. If you're going to communicate, you have to be able to do it. Else, everyone else just have to agree to learn one language and just kind of use that as the branch language, which does happen in many places, by the way. Delhi, for example, in India has, I believe, 26 languages that are spoken commonly throughout the city. That's unbelievable to us. But this also has a counter effect as well. I remember a friend of mine who, you know, his wife is from Japan. He's from Wisconsin. He had some relatives coming to visit from his wife's side of the family, and they're like, right, we want to see Disney World in Washington, D.C., and we're thinking we could go out and see the sequoias out in, you know, the West and all those different things. We were wondering, how long are you going to be here for? 4 days. Like, yeah, that ain't happening. Why? Like, it's got out the map. It's like, this is how big it is. He's like, oh. Like, there's just this disconnect of how enormous the distance really, really is. I mean, well, it's more like a misunderstanding of space. And that's one of the things we talked about with location. You know, understanding just how freaking huge the United States is compared to some places. Now compare us also to somewhere like Russia, where the vast majority of the country is essentially wilderness. Like, take Siberia, for instance. Siberia is pretty much made up of ice and tigers. It's not really a place you want to go, you know. But, that being said, you know, this also influences culture in a lot of different ways. Which brings me to the next theme of geography, human-environment interaction. That's basically people's relationships with the earth. Or as one of my teachers once said, the environment shapes the human's response. In essence, you know, we like to think of ourselves as being original. We like to think of ourselves as individuals with our own wants, needs, thoughts, feelings, all this kind of stuff. And we are, to some extent. But we also have our choices made up for us in a lot of different ways. Weather tremendously influences how we live our lives. Now, granted, technology lets us kind of cheat, right? Consider what life would be like right now, here where we are right now, without climate control. That's no heat and no cooling. Winter would actually be not that terrible. In truth, I mean, it's really not all that bad. If you have, good clothes, like good, nice wool clothes, things like that, you can go pretty much anywhere. But think about the summer. Holy crap. That's like, you don't even want to cook inside your house because the heat generated from the cooking, I'd say fire, but whatever. It just heats up the whole point. You just want to die, And frankly, we experienced something that's a little bit different from other places. Actually, I remember someone coming in, visiting a friend of ours from California who passed out one summer because of the humidity. And they're like, I did not expect it to be this hot. It's like, dude, you're from California. And another guy, he went to Arizona and it was like 120 degrees and he was like, this is awesome. They're like, you're insane. He's like, it's nothing compared to the humidity and things like that, whatever. But the thing is, it also changes depending on what grows in different places. For instance, you guys are probably aware that certain crops don't grow in certain places, yeah? So, let's talk about sugar for a second. We like sugar, yeah? Sugar is outstanding. Do you guys know, at one point in history, sugar was worth more than gold? It was super expensive. And the reason was it only grew in the tropical climates. So it had to come pretty much from the area around India. Now, fast forward a number of years, it was discovered it would grow well in these newfangled colonies in Latin America, slave labor, all this kind of stuff happens, and boom, you have a sugar trade. Eventually, the price goes down because of automation. And now we live in a society where you can eat food from pretty much anywhere in the world. Think about that. That's fascinating. Let's talk about breakfast for a second. Breakfast, the most important meal of the day that nobody does. I know you're like, I totally believe it. That's fine. That's okay. What are some classic breakfast foods? Cereal. Okay, let's start with that. All right, so let's talk about, do you guys know what the word cereal means? No. It means grain. Okay? Now, what kind of grains do we use for making cereal? Well, wheat's a common one, yeah? You guys know where wheat originates from? Europe. It's basically grass. It's grass that we have bioengineered to be edible by humans. Let's fast forward. Another grain that's commonly used. Corn. Where's corn from? North America. Originally called maize. You guys saw that thing on the video? You know that. All right, so that's cereals, right? Which is often sweetened with sugar, which is from India. Let's move on. What's another thing? Eggs. Interestingly enough. Now we're going to get the chickens. The most common chicken for laying eggs is actually a spliced gene hybrid from different breeds from Bavaria and England. Why would you do that? Because ultimately, for an egg-laying chicken, you want them to lay every day. Most chickens don't do that. In fact, there is a breed of chicken originally from South America called, well, actually the spliced version is called the Americana, but it's actually Araucana, which is from the area around Peru, which lays blue eggs. I have one. No, the chicken's not blue. The chicken's brown. It lays green eggs. Yeah, because of things. Anyways, so basically, depending on where you got your eggs from, most probably from the supermarket, you probably got one of the hybrids that was created from a variety of different genes from around the world. Let's move on. What else is a good breakfast food? Bacon. Why not? I'll talk about Pop-Tarts in a sec. Bacon, right? Bacon coming from hogs, which originated from Europe. Specifically, the most common one is actually a meat herding variety from, I believe, Germany. So that's an example again. So let's talk Pop-Tarts. Do you guys know who created Pop-Tarts? No. African slaves. Yeah, because basically there was a group of slaves who specialized in working in houses. And what they would do is when they would make a pie for their masters, they would have leftovers, like you do. Like if you're doing baking, you got leftovers. They would take those and make what were called pocket pies, which were much smaller. They would tend to be kind of shaped thusly, so they could be put in a pocket. And what we started doing is reheating them in an iron, a pie iron, that's square shaped. You toast it, and they're freaking delicious, let me tell you. In fact, if you look at what we consider American cuisine, most of it comes from African Americans. For instance, let's talk barbecue for a second. You guys like barbecue? One of the trends of barbecue is it's actually the worst cut of meat.
What'd you say?
It's the worst cut of meat. Like, for instance, brisket is actually considered not that great historically because it's filled with various fats and things like that. You just try to cook it over fire and eat it, it's really tough and gritty. So basically, necessity being the mother of invention, they figured out that if you cook it low and slow, like 16 hours, it breaks down all the fats and the collagens within the meat and bastes it from the inside and makes it like that delicious, wonderful barbecue that you have, and thus invented a new style of cooking that actually originated from the area of the Caribbean. In fact, do you guys know the term buccaneer? It is kind of associated with pirates. That actually came from a French word called boucanier, which was a style of cooking that was invented by natives where they would take baskets and they would cook things over a low fire. These groups of basically sort of vagabonds would catch animals illegally. They would poach them on islands and then cook them up and sell the meat they cooked to passing ships for a profit. Eventually they were driven out by the Spanish and pissed that they lost their livelihood, took up weapons and fought with the English against the Spanish by stealing ship prizes as a way of hurting them economically, thus giving us the idea of buccaneers being pirates. So it's all historical. Regardless, if you think about what we just described, your typical breakfast. Oh, we didn't even get to coffee yet.
No, I drank coffee.
Coffee, right? You guys know where coffee is originally from?
Oh, let me see.
Saudi Arabia.
No, wasn't any that.
Yep. In fact, if you look at most coffee tins, they'll say something about Arabica. Basically, it's a strain of coffee bean that came from Arabia. And in fact, the Europeans, when they first encountered coffee, they called it Arab wine. Know why? Because, well, that comes from cafe, which is another word entirely. It's etymology. But anyways, but no, the reason is that coffee drinking was very common, alcohol not so much because it is banned in Islam. So it's the next best thing, right? Although, frankly, tea is also incredibly popular, and is the most popular drink on earth. All right, we'll continue this tomorrow. Peace out. Oh, for goodness sakes.